And then speaking of people and meaning, you write, your money needs a way. With the right goals, we can not only accumulate more wealth, but we can do it in a more enjoyable and satisfying way.
Purpose and meaning are sort of human super fuel. I mean, I can already tell you my next book will be entirely about meaning and purpose. The impact of naming your dollars or ascribing them a purpose is just so powerful. In the great financial crisis, people who had a purpose ascribed to their dollars were 10 times less likely to go to cash, to panic sell, than people whose accounts were purposeless, were unnamed. People who looked at a picture of their children before they made a financial decision. So a 5-second glance at a picture of your family before you made a financial decision, 2.5 times as much retirement savings as those in a control group. People who visualize that meaning, whose advisors help them visualize that meaning, saved better than 70% more than those who didn't. So a lot of times we stop and we say, okay, hey, where do you want to retire? I want a mountain home in Aspen. They found that if they went that next level of visualization, right? Okay, well, where will it be situated on the mountain? What will it smell like in the morning when you go out and you have your coffee? Just getting into the depth and the richness of the vision and making it more meaningful, that process made people dramatically more likely to save.
Welcome to Talking Billions. We talk about big ideas, big inspirations, big topics. We take on the hardest topic of all, money. How to make it, save it, keep it. But our conversations lead us to an even bigger question, what it means to live a rich life beyond money. My guests share their practices, principles, and evergreen wisdom. I'm your host, Bogumil Baranowski, author, TEDx speaker, and investment advisor to wealth creators with patient capital and an infinite investment horizon. I work with families and individuals who aspire to grow wealth over a lifetime and generations through disciplined, thoughtful investments in durable quality businesses while giving money meaning. Join me on this quest to unearth and share the wisdom of the ages. Let me share with you the podcast program disclosure statement. Blue Infinitas Capital LLC is a registered investment advisor, and the opinions expressed by the firm's employees and podcast guests on the show are their own and do not reflect the opinions of Blue Infinitas Capital. All the statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. The information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. The information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for any individual. Listeners are encouraged to seek advice from a qualified tax, legal, or investment advisor to determine whether any information presented may be suitable for their specific situation. Past performance is not indicative of future performance. None of what you're about to hear is investment advice. My guest today is Dr. Daniel Crosby. He's a psychologist and behavioral finance expert who helps organizations understand the intersection of mind and markets. He's the best-selling author of 4 books. His latest book will be the focus of our conversation today. It's called The Soul of Wealth, 50 Reflections on Money and Meaning. How are you, Dan? So nice to see you.
I'm great. Thank you for having me back. I'm honored.
Well, it's a real pleasure. I do want to mention for the benefit of the audience that I had Dan on the show before, so go back and look up that episode. We talked about the other books. And let's get started about the book. I really like the structure. It's a collection of essays, so you can read it at your own pace. And each essay has a story and a lesson. And I feel like the stories make me remember the lessons better. So I have Amundsen's expedition to the South Pole in my head and I don't think it will leave me for a long time, but I'll ask you about it in a moment. I want to start with the quote from the book. You say, "It's my goal that the Soul of Wealth will challenge your thinking, rekindle forgotten truths, and empower you to embrace a more energized and emotionally honest relationship with your money." And then you add something I really like. "Humankind finds itself at a strange crossroads. We know intuitively that true wealth, real wealth, soulful wealth is about far more than money. Yet far too often we act as though money is an end unto itself, sacrificing some of the richest parts of our lives in its pursuit." Tell me more about both. I mean, they give me chills every time I read them.
Well, this is a bit of a soapbox of mine, and is a big reason why I wrote the book in the first place. So get ready for an earful. For most of human history, we have barely scraped by. I mean, if you look at the true timeline of human history, even somewhat recently, as recently as the founding of the United States of America, 250-ish years ago, 85% of the world was living in poverty. What would now be $2 or less a day on an inflation adjusted basis. So, I mean, consider that 85% of the world living in absolutely back-breaking poverty. Today, that number is about 8.5%, 9%. Now, that's still too many people. Like one hungry person, one impoverished person is one too many. But it can't be overstated how far we've come in such a short amount of time. For most of human history, people were just trying to get enough to eat and get enough calories and get a roof over their heads. And they had very little time for sort of higher order thinking and these sort of secondary considerations. Well, now we have 2,000 calories. We create 2,000 calories of nutrition for every person on the planet now. Now, it's not all equally distributed, right? But now we've got more deaths from excess than we have from lack when it comes to food. I mean, there's far more deaths due to obesity than there are from starvation now. So in the Western world, in the developed world, this is the best it has ever been. Like, I mean, by far. There's just more abundance, there's more wealth. And then simultaneously, we have this deep isolation and this deep despair. I'm in my mid 40s. People my age and younger, most Americans say that they're lonely, that they're socially isolated. A recent survey of people about how many friends they have found that the number has declined dramatically, and that the modal number, so going back to your stats 100 class, the mode is the most frequently occurring response. The modal response is zero, like no true friends. And so we have this weird juxtaposition of enormous abundance and enormous despair. For a while there, the American average age at time of death, the average life expectancy was dropping because of drug addiction and suicide and these deaths of despair. So it's this strange juxtaposition of like enormous abundance and enormous spiritual, existential, psychological despair. And that's why I wrote the book. I told you this was a soapbox, but that's why I wrote the book, to try and help bridge that gap. Like, okay, we've got all this abundance. How can we deploy it in a way that actually brings us happiness and contentment?
You might remember that I manage money for families, and I've been doing it for 20 years. And it taught me a lot of things, not just stock picking and building a portfolio, but more about the psychology of it. And I agree with you, and the book really resonated with me that money is not the answer. It solves a lot of problems, as you write in the book, but not all the problems. I want to target another topic from your book. There are 50 essays, so we won't touch on all of them, but I just want to highlight a few of them. At some point you talk about work, and I wrote down, you wrote how we tragically tend to pursue numbers at the expense of values. And I really like this quote. You said, work, one of our primary aims in times of health, emerges as one of our most significant regrets when we reminisce on life. It's a very powerful statement. The entire life we think that work is everything, and we do everything at the expense of that. Everything else is less important. And then at the end of our life, we look back and nobody says, I wish I worked harder, right? We know that from all those studies. Can you talk about that phenomenon?
Sure. So we have a really strange relationship with work, and it's wrong-headed in a couple of profound ways, right? So, we're recording this at the end of October. In a couple of months, many of us, most of us, will set goals, right? We'll say, hey, it's a new year. This is a chance for reinvention, sort of a round number, 25, sort of a round number year. Like, I think, people will be setting goals and thinking about where they're going next. Work and then nutrition secondarily are always sort of the 1-2 of the sort of goals we set, like more money, get a promotion, make more money sort of thing. And then when we look at how people think about work at the end of their lives, right? Bronnie Ware, this Australian nurse who was like a palliative care, like a hospice nurse, she's sitting with people in their pain at the end of their lives and talking to them about, what did you do well? What are your regrets? What do you wish you had a mulligan on? And work only comes up once. I mean, they have I list these top 5 regrets of the dying in the book. Work only comes up once. And it's for people to say, I wish I had worked less. Like, I wish I had worked less.
Yeah.
But then, so, table that for a second. And in that same chapter, though, I also talk about the power of work, and many of us are preparing for retirement. And I quote the work of Martin Seligman, this positive psychologist. Many of us are just striving for this day where we can stop working, where we can just stop working and we can just go sit on a beach somewhere or play golf all day or sort of whatever the ideal, the sort of antiquated ideal for retirement was, this life of leisure. Well, leisure is only one facet of a full life, and there's 5 that I list there, and one of them is work. So we have this really sort of goofy idea about work, and I think we need to work towards greater integration with work and doing work that's more personally meaningful to us. I think a lot of times we sacrifice our lives and our health and our happiness on the altar of the job that pays the most.
Right.
And then we're sort of miserable in that job and we want to get free from it as soon as possible. In many respects, large parts of the FIRE movement have been predicated on this idea. Just get the highest paying job you can, no matter how miserable, gut it out until you have enough money to walk away from it. And so work is simultaneously super important and not as important as we make it. And we need to, sort of put work in the right box, which is an integral part of a life well lived, but not the end all be all, especially the kind of work that we're doing just for money.
So many powerful ideas there. And, it makes me think of optimizing, maximizing. And I've been thinking a lot about the enjoyable journey, making life an enjoyable journey. Will you maximize all the outputs? Probably not, but trying to think, how can I be happy about all the outcomes, not just work? And obviously, I'm about your age, mid-40s, and I'm thinking when I was 20, I definitely was looking at the world in a different way. So the best paying opportunity out of school was very important. But then I quickly realized I have to ask a few more questions and course correct that decision. But we learn as we go. I wish I knew more when I was 20. So hopefully somebody...
I think that's to put a finer point on that, I think that's such an important consideration. I think most of us optimize for salary. And I think that is almost an unquestioned, optimum, that just we're going to take the job that pays the best. And I think that work truly conceptualized in the way that I've tried to write about it in the book, it's one of sort of 5 primary pillars of a happy life. And it shouldn't be spiking your cortisol. Like, it shouldn't be making you miserable. And I think sometimes money's not nothing, right? Like money's important, and I that's a thread that runs through the book. But optimizing for salary in a vacuum is the wrong thing. And look, I've done that for most of my life. Spent most of my professional life optimizing for money, and I think only we wizened, 40 mid 40s guys are starting to figure it out that maybe that wasn't the greatest choice.
I'm happy it's happening now, not when I reach 65 and I look
Sure.
back. I wish I knew that when I was 44.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about a certain emotion. It's a couple of emotions, and you have tell a story of Van Gogh and his ear, self-doubt, jealousy, and the challenges of comparing yourself to others. And I saw it as a big picture challenge to happiness or hurdle here. Can you retell in a nutshell that story and what a tormented journey it was for him?
Yeah, so, you set up the book nicely. There's these 50 narratives. Basically, every one of the 50 chapters starts with a narrative, then gets into the research, and then gets into some application. And I'm very proud of that format. People really seem to be enjoying it, so I'm happy that I went that direction. But the Van Gogh story, it's part of a chapter called "Comparison is the thief of joy." Van Gogh is, of course, an incredible, like we recognize today, an incredible talent, a person with incredible gifts, but he didn't always think that way about himself. And today he's sort of known as much for his psychosis as his art. And sort of the most memorable thing that he did was that he cut off, all or part of his ear. Like that's sort of under, when you start to dig in, it's a little bit in dispute, how much of his ear he cut off. But he cuts off his ear, delivers it to a brothel, right? And packages it up. And I read these papers. There were actually 13 different sort of reasons, hypothesized reasons why he may have done this. But sort of the prevailing thought is that he was friends with and sort of frenemies with Paul Gauguin, the artist. And we know that Van Gogh, we only know for sure that Van Gogh sold one painting in his entire career. It's suspected that he sold as many as five, but no more than five for sure, and only no more than five, and only one for sure. And so he was not a commercial success. And Gauguin was having, extraordinary commercial success and was sort of recognized in his day, whereas Van Gogh was more recognized posthumously. And so his friend is receiving all this critical acclaim and is having, making more money, and he's jealous. And his brother is getting married. His brother was sort of his benefactor and giving him money and providing him a place to live. And his brother's sort of moving on with his life too. And he's getting married and finding happiness. And Van Gogh, has neither the talent of Gauguin nor the sort of life trajectory of his brother. And so the supposition is that he cut his ear off as sort of the way that a toddler throws a fit to try and get attention and get people to nurture him and to take care of him. And then of course he eventually took his own life. And I talk in the chapter, the research around this concept is really incredible. When you look at people's contentment levels, their happiness and their contentment with their wealth, their actual level of wealth is not the best predictor of their contentment. Like in a vacuum, from a purely mathematical, analytical perspective, we would assume that, yeah, like your contentment with your wealth is going to rise and fall pretty directly with how much wealth you have. But it isn't that. The best predictor of financial contentment is your reference class. So it's, who are you comparing yourself to? Because there will always be someone richer. There will always be someone richer. And I actually experienced this in my own life. We about 10 years ago, we moved from a relatively, nice but modest neighborhood to a much nicer neighborhood we're sort of the poor kids on the block. And some of my neighbors are quite wealthy, and you're just surrounded by a reference class that's really not good for your head. And so, people are usually as happy or as sad as the people they're comparing themselves to. And so understanding this, it becomes critical that we think hard about, who we befriend and who we surround ourselves to, and the yardsticks that we measure to think about our own success, because they found that people who were middle class were actually the most contented, because they were able to look up the socioeconomic ladder and say, yeah, some people are, doing better than me, but, hey, maybe that's something for me to strive for. But they're also able to look down the socioeconomic ladder and go, well, hey, I've got some blessings, I've got some good things going my way, and I'm doing better than lots of folks. People who are at the bottom of the ladder, I'll look up a lot with envy, and people who are at the top of the ladder tend to look down with disdain. And again, like it really matters how we compare and to whom we compare our wealth and success.
It's such an important revelation because in investing, the fear of missing out and comparing yourself with others can get you in trouble. But I think every day, what you're pointing out, it feeds into this lack of contentment. If you see that other people have more and somehow it gets to you, I think it's a practice and it's not easy. And I can definitely, I witness it and I was a part of it and I see it looking around, and I don't have a quick recipe, but it's something, the minute you're aware of it, I think you start to think about it differently when you see, actually, I am doing it to myself. Nobody is doing it to me, so I'm making it hard on myself. As long as it motivates you in some way, maybe that's good. But at some point, I think it can get you in trouble. I want to talk about meaning and people and business, and I have two quotes that I really liked from your book. You say, the reasons why meaning may drive this outsized business success are undoubtedly complex, but it likely starts where most things do, with the people. And then speaking of people and meaning, you write, your money needs a way. With the right goals, we can not only accumulate more wealth, but we can do it in a more enjoyable and satisfying way. Could you share how you think about it? I really like the word meaning, and I talk about it quite a bit with my clients. Like, what does this money mean to you, and what are the goals behind it? I like when there's a context, and it's very nuanced depending on the family.
Yeah, I believe that purpose and meaning are sort of human super fuel. I mean, I can already tell you my next book will be entirely about meaning and purpose, because in the process of putting this book together, on meaning and money, you just become so convinced of the power of purpose. It's almost like science fiction. So, you quoted from two chapters there. I'll talk about the one, where your money needs a why. The impact of naming your dollars or ascribing them a purpose is just so powerful. In the great financial crisis, people who had a purpose ascribed to their dollars were 10 times less likely to go to cash, to panic sell, than people whose accounts were purposeless, were unnamed. When we look at a 2009 study out of Canada, people who looked at a picture of their children before they made a financial decision, so a 5-second glance at a picture of your family before you made a financial decision, two and a half times as much retirement savings as those in a control group. Another Morningstar study found that goals-based accounts, ones that were tied to purpose, tended to be 15% larger than similar non-goals-based accounts. I mean, the research just goes on and on and on. And, the last thing I'll talk about is a lot of times we sort of stop with goals. I think a lot of times in the industry we'll say, like, what are your financial goals? And purpose and meaning have a lot more heft than goals. And I think a lot of people's goals are pretty shallow. They tend to be sort of lame and mimetic. We get them from looking at other people. So we'll say, I want $1 million, or I want 10 million, or $100 million. Just pick some sort of round number out of the sky without really tying it to much. But
Hmm.
I cite research in the book from the Clonces that talks about visualization. People who visualize that meaning, whose advisors help them visualize that meaning, saved better than 70% more than those who didn't. So a lot of times we stop and we say, okay, you know, uh, hey, where do you want to retire? And you go, well, I want a house in Aspen. I want a mountain home in Aspen. And we go, oh, okay, well, a mountain home in Aspen costs whatever, $3 million. And so we'll start budgeting for that. They found that if they went that next level of visualization, right? Okay, well, where will it be situated on the mountain? Like, how proximal will it be to the ski lift? What will it smell like in the morning when you go out and you have your coffee? Just getting into the depth and the richness of the vision and making it more meaningful,
Hmm.
that process made people dramatically more likely to save. And the other chapter you talk about is a whole separate chapter. Here's a little inside baseball. The meaning at work chapter was the last one to go in. There was actually another chapter there, and I didn't like it. When I read through the book, I was like, this is weak. And I had been doing some research on meaning, and so I put the meaning at work chapter in, and I'm really pleased with how that came out. But it talks about companies who have a well identified purpose and
Right.
how much better they do than their peers. So this is just one example. If we could sell a pill, right? If we could sell a pill to investors that would make them twice as likely to save, 10 times less likely to go to cash, on and on and on, people would pay good money for that pill, but yet we ignore purpose, right? So I think purpose, I was proud to write about purpose a couple of places in the book. I think it's one of these things that not only elevates our lives, but also elevates our investing behaviors in pretty powerful ways.
There's so many things that you brought up. I'll focus on one thing. I like this image of planting trees for others to enjoy. And it's
Mm,
been quoted many, many times, but the families I work with, the money has been around for many generations and hopefully lasts for many more. But they do think about the next generation or the
mm,
causes that they're dear to their heart. And that gives some context to the wealth. And they definitely feel more, not financially, but emotionally invested as well, which is really fun to see. It's more rewarding to know we're going somewhere. There's a purpose to it. And it definitely helps in times that you bring up where it's stressful. The market drops, there are concerns, and you can actually stay on your course that you set instead of trying to second guess where you're going because you have no direction. So I've read many books on money, wealth, and investing over the years, and it resonates with me, this idea that I see in your book that there's a certain gap between knowing and doing. So when you read a book, you realize, well, kind of everybody should know this by now. And we kind of know. We've heard it somewhere, but we don't do it. And you bring up a story of the tragic story of Titanic as an example of that gap. How do we close that gap, and what happened on Titanic?
yeah, in the Titanic, what I reference is just not having enough lifeboats. They
Mm-hmm.
knew when they were building this, like, look, like this isn't adequately resourced, right? This doesn't have enough lifeboats. But they just didn't care, right? I mean, they thought that it was unsinkable in that case. I honestly can't remember if I talk about this in the book or not, but my favorite example of this from the research is that nurses smoke cigarettes at nearly double the rate of the general population. And it's pretty crazy to consider. You go, what in the world? Like, nurses of all people, nurses spend their whole lives telling people not to smoke, among other things. And, why would they leave their shift and go light up when it's so bad for you? Well, nurses have stressful jobs and they
Mhm.
work long hours, and smoking gives them a break and it gives them a little stress relief. And so really our behavior tends to be less about what we know, and more about where we place ourselves and the sort of situations we put ourselves in, right? Um, Depending on, it's hard to get accurate stats on this because people uh, lie about their sexual behavior, but something like 15 to 25% of married couples cheat on their partners, right? So if 20% of people are cheating on their partners, 0% of them think it's the thing to do, right? Like 0% of them think that it's a positive thing that you should be doing, but yet they put themselves out with a person they're attracted to late at night in a place where they're alone, and then kind of one thing leads to another. So knowing knowing what to do and doing the right thing have
Mhm.
almost nothing in common. And that's really hard for people to get their heads around because we take this rationalist perspective, and we even do it with things like financial literacy. And like, this is a deeply unpopular opinion,
Mhm.
but there's a lot of evidence to show that financial literacy is a very weak predictor of financial behavior because there's very few people who are gambling on risky, micro cap stocks or meme coins or sports gambling or something. If you said, "Hey, like, is this optimal financial behavior?"
Mhm.
Pretty much to a person they would tell you no. Like, but it's fun or it's speculative or it's whatever. So that, I think, is sort of the meta takeaway, that environment is a much better predictor of behavior than knowledge. And so more than you need to read a bunch of books
Mhm.
on how to manage your money, you need to make sure that you're surrounding yourself with people, places, and ideas that are going to help you make better decisions with your money. And, I think standing in the right circles is a much better thing than trying to know more and then white knuckle your way to good behavior.
I find the topic fascinating. And over the years, I met people who made really good, financially speaking, decisions and clearly didn't have the knowledge, the depth, the understanding. And then I meet people like the nurses that you bring up that have all the knowledge and have
Yeah.
seen people that got sick because of smoking, and they still don't follow the wisdom, the knowledge, the principles, however you want to describe it. And I find it fascinating. I'll just bring up a quick story. In Omaha, every single year at Berkshire meeting, I meet somebody that has held shares for a couple of decades. And usually these are very kind, sweet individuals that have nothing to do with the investment profession. They live very modest lives. Last year, I met somebody, a couple, she was a teacher, and she was sitting next to me and she was telling me the story. But they made a decision to never sell the shares, and now it's a substantial, all of their really wealth these days, and they still have a hard time selling those shares. And it's fascinating because she clearly was very honest about it. She had no ability to analyze Buffett's decision making or what Berkshire could become, and on and on and on. Not an expert, but yet did the right thing. So I'm always fascinated. Why did you do the right thing, and why so many smart people have a hard time doing the right thing?
I
It,
don't know if you're familiar. I don't know if you've seen the meme. It's like a bell curve of intelligence
uh-huh.
with, the person on the low end, the left tail of the bell curve, and the person on the extreme right tail, making the same decision. And the person at the 50th percentile there, the person in sort of the average range intelligence, is overthinking things and doing too much. Like, I
True.
think in finance, one of the biggest impediments, some of the worst decisions I've ever made with my money came when I was maybe 3 to 5 years into learning about financial markets. Because if I had known nothing, or next to nothing. If I had known, max out your 401k, never touch it, save 10% of your income and put it in stocks, that's pretty good, right? It was where I had that sort of just enough knowledge to be dangerous that I think it gets problematic. And so many of us live in that world with respect to various facets of life. We sort of know just enough to hurt ourselves.
Mhm. And I'll come back to it because at some point in the book, you talk about the need for a financial advisor, investment advisor in your life to walk you through those tough times. I want to come back to it. But I do want to bring up something that's not surprising that's in your book, which is the delayed gratification. And you make, obviously, an argument in favor of it. You bring up the big guns, as I would say. You bring up Kennedy's Cuban Missile Crisis, the Beatles, and even Adam and Eve and the bite of an apple. And happiness for eternity instead of this one bite. Can you talk about delayed gratification? And you call it the ultimate life hack. I mean, I think might be one of the best parts of the book for me.
Yeah, it's I'm a little bored by finance in isolation, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
very excited by places where money and life intersect. And I had a guest on my podcast a while back. His name's Dr. Michael Finka, and he's a well-known thinker in the space. He actually has two PhDs,
Mm-hmm.
and he was getting his first PhD in nutrition. And while he was getting this first PhD in nutrition, he came across the surprising to him at the time result that people who engaged in sort of nutritionally sound behavior also tended to be wealthy because it had generalized. And so this sort of ignited a passion for him to go explore, to go get a second PhD in finance and say, well, why is it that the same people who were eating an apple a day are sort of maxing out their retirement savings? And it all came down to this sort of fundamental understanding that delayed gratification is really what it's all about. We are primed for the here and now. Like we're primed for the here and now with our money, food, sex, like, on and on and on. Um, but joy, right? Like moment to moment sort of hedonistic pleasure is maximized by grabbing that moment. Like eating a donut feels incredible in the moment, right? But the aggregate act of eating a donut every day on your long-term health is miserable and it's very painful. Saving money. We experience saving money as a present loss because that $100 I save on setting aside for my retirement is $100 that I can't go spend on music or guitars or Thai food or a million other things. And so it's this tricky paradox because we are wired for the here and now, um, but real joy and sort of lasting fulfillment comes from doing things that are even a little bit painful in the moment, uh, in service of a better tomorrow. This year I've lost like 55 pounds this year, and I've done it in this slow process of a daily calorie deficit. So like every single day, I'm just a little bit short of what my body is burning. And at first it was absolutely miserable. Like, I mean, in the first week I was cramping, I was really uncomfortable. But now it's wonderful. I feel healthier, you sleep better, you look better, better performance at the gym. And that's true of our relationships, that's true of our money, that's true of our health. So it's, trading that short-term hedonistic pleasure for longer-term fulfillment is just one of the things we have to learn to do.
It makes me think, I'm thinking about the evolution, if that's the road to take here, but there is a certain contradiction that there are moments that indeed you have to grab the opportunity when it appears, right? You see the juicy fruit and just grab it because somebody else will take it. And then there are moments where you have to plant the seeds and wait a season to pick the grain or the squash at the end of the year, or pumpkin. And there are those moments where, which situation is it? I think we our brain gets confused. Is it the moment where I should act fast, or is it the moment where I should wait?
Well, it's interesting. I think evolution is exactly the right path to take. You know, go back to my previous mention of sort of the timeline of human history. You know, you know, depending on how old you think humankind is, and there's plenty of debate to be had there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you know, give or take a few days, the pyramids would have been built on December 25th, right? I mean, if we condensed human history down to a 1 year timeline, you know, give or take a few days, the pyramids were built on Christmas Day. And so for most of that time, you needed to seize the moment, right? Like if you
Yeah.
found the berries or you killed the elk or whatever, you should get on it because there was no, you know, there was no refrigeration. There was there was no guarantee of, you know, what you were going to run into tomorrow, or if you'd meet an angry, you know, an angry band of enemies.
Mm-hmm.
And so for most of human history,
Mm-hmm.
eating eating the thing, however rich, however sweet, however fattening, right, was the thing to do. For much of human history, the thing to do was
Sure.
to spend the money because you
Mm-hmm.
lived to be 30 years old. And so we find ourselves in this weird place now. When my youngest child was born, I remember the doctor coming in and saying, like, look, there's like a 40% chance that this kid will live to be 100. And when America was founded, the average life expectancy was 36. And that's not that long ago, right? I mean, that's not that long ago. So, for most of human history, we have been wired to eat the apple, eat the elk, you know, grab the sexual partner, whatever it is, right? And we live in a world now where resources are less scarce, life is longer. We are playing a slower, longer, more contemplative game, and our bodies and our minds have not caught up.
So related to that, we're talking about the big history of the species as such, and I'm thinking about our own personal history and our childhood and upbringing. And I asked that question in my podcast quite a bit, and I really paused when I came across the sentence in your book where you say who we are today as savers and investors is undeniably influenced by our upbringing and early experiences. And I couldn't agree with you more, but tell me more about it, because it takes a moment to look back at those early days, and I do it with some of the guests on this show, and we both discover something that molded them at the age of 5 or 6 that has such a huge influence, even when it comes to decision making and risk reward and all that.
Yeah, I'll tell you about the psychological construct that sort of explains some of this behavior, but then I'll talk about a personal anecdote if that's all right. So,
Mm-hmm.
uh, one of the psychological constructs at play is this idea of primacy and recency. So we have a really good memory for primacy, things that happened early in a sequence, you know, our life in this case, and recency, right? Things that have happened most recently. Primacy is your youth, right? Like this is, you know, or it even could be like for me, primacy could also be my career, right? So if you think about my youth, my dad is a financial advisor, like he still is to this day. He got his job on the day I was literally the day I was born. Like he got his job as a financial advisor that he still has now. And I'm the oldest. I'm the oldest of four children. And previous to that, my mom was working at McDonald's. Like when she was pregnant with me, my mom was working at McDonald's, and my dad was cutting lawns. Like he had dropped out of his MBA program. He was kind of aimless professionally. He didn't know what he wanted to do, and he was mowing yards. And so we did not have money. Like when in my youth, my dad's career was getting off the ground. He was cold calling, trying to build a clientele. And so I remember being in kindergarten or first grade, and you get these forms home from the school where your parents fill out to see if you qualify for free school lunch because of you don't cross a certain income threshold. And I brought this home to my parents from school, and my parents filled it out, and they said, oh, you qualify for free lunch.
Hmm.
And I remember so well sitting in my, childhood living room and having always just thought we were middle class and going, are we poor? Like, just having the thought like, what? Like I can get free lunch from the government? Does this like do we not have money? Are we going to be okay? Um and then I have a brother who is 12 years younger than me. My youngest sibling is 12 years, my brother who produces my podcast, who's 12 years younger than me. And by this time, 12 years into his career, my dad's doing very well, like very well, you know. And so my brother's approach and attitude toward money could not be more different than mine because when I grew up, it was McDonald's, mowing lawns, and
Hmm.
qualifying for free lunches. When my brother grew up, it's successful financial professional.
Hmm.
And the way that we view the world of money to this day, the way that it is shaped mindsets, our approaches to our careers is very dramatic.
Hmm.
Because even within the same household, different primacy experiences. We really grew up in different financial households, even though we have the same, same four walls and the same parents.
It's such a powerful story and such a great reminder. Same family, same parents, different points in time,
Mhm.
different contexts and different outcomes. And I think the habits that you do have these days and the topics you're interested in, I think go back to those early days when you just wanted to figure out. And even the big question, are we poor? And I think it's a very powerful question. It comes up on this podcast a lot in many conversations with very successful individuals where many of them didn't actually know that they were growing up with what statistically you would call poverty. And you realize at some point when somebody else points it out to you, listen, other people have more. And especially that school experience makes you realize, wait a second. I want to bring up a bigger topic. I work with families and I manage money, as you know, and you bring up a topic of a substantial wealth and cash windfall at some point in your book, and how it's overwhelming, it can be paralyzing, it's a mix of excitement and nervousness, and then you're overwhelmed. Should I go in and invest or not invest? When do I wait? And there's fear and there are all kinds of concerns, and at the end you say you do need help, and it comes up as a very powerful, advice here, because I think some people think I can do it all by myself, but then I realize I go to a dentist, I go to a tax accountant, and then when it comes to money, people feel I'll just handle it on my own. But you you have a different advice on that front.
Yeah, so it goes back to the knowing doing gap, right?
Mm-hmm.
The knowing doing gap again. Um, People who work with a professional with respect to their money, the data on this is so sort of incredible. So first, we've got the dollars and cents stuff. There's a lot of studies to suggest that people who work with a professional do better than those who don't by a pretty dramatic margin. But it's not because that professional has access to some esoteric hedge fund that only they can get a hold of or something else. It's typically because that financial professional keeps that person from making a handful of catastrophic mistakes over the life of their wealth, over their life, right? Um, I met with a friend yesterday who lost millions speculating on crypto, right? Um, if they had worked with an advisor who
Mm.
could have said, let's talk about, a more measured allocation to crypto, or let's talk about which type of crypto we want to speculate in and how, I mean, one meeting could have saved this gentleman millions of dollars, right?
Mhm.
And so there's sort of the financial aspect to it. But there's also holistic benefits. People who work with a financial professional are less likely to get divorced. They have higher levels of marital communication. They're more prepared for an emergency, even sort of like natural disasters and other things. There's just this cascade of benefits that come to outsourcing it. And maybe the biggest one of all is that we see that people who work with financial pros are happier and have higher aggregate levels of happiness and greater peace of mind because when you look at this stress in America surveys, the latest one, okay? Number one stressor in America is money. Number two stressor is work. Number three is the economy. So that's, money, money, and money,
Sure.
basically. Are and then relationships are fourth. So when you think that, money, where you make your money, and where you spend your money are the top three concerns of Americans, if you can get help with that and you can get that right, it raises all boats. Like other parts of your life start to improve because money touches every part of our lives.
It's a lot of very heavy worry off your shoulders if you have
Hmm.
somebody in your life, especially if it's
Yeah.
the right person. And the second thing, that person, if it is the right person, they live it and breathe it every day. That's the only thing they do. And they've seen 1,000 cases like I have working with families. So you have access to an incredible resource if you sit down with someone. As an anecdote, I was talking to somebody how nobody brags about doing their taxes on their own. Dan, I'm so proud. I spent the weekend. I did my own taxes because it's something that's not sexy. It's not something people want to do, but they do brag about the fact that they invest on their own. So I don't know if it's good that investing is still seen as, I don't know, attractive, alluring from that perspective as something that I'm doing it on my own. How about you do your taxes on your own? Spend a weekend. Nobody wants to do that. But that there's a lesson there. I want to talk about time and money. I find the topic fascinating. It comes up quite a bit in the conversations here, and it's on my mind because I see people with substantial wealth, and I see that time is something that they really care about. And you say buying time is one of the most powerful yet most overlooked sources of joy. And then you write, time is truly the one thing that you can buy now that will always be more valuable tomorrow. Both really powerful ways to frame it. Can you talk about it?
That is good. I'm glad I wrote that. So,
Mm-hmm.
there are a couple of places where I touch on this throughout the book, but one what got me thinking about this was one of the richest people in the world. I was reading an article about one of, the top 10 richest people in the world. And he was talking about a series of standing meetings he has on Saturday nights. And one was he had a meeting with his sort of top lieutenants at 9 p.m. on Saturday night. And I was reading this thinking, what an impoverished way to live. Because at Saturday night at 9 o'clock, I'm either out with my friends, having great conversations and great food and just enjoying time with my friends. I'm sitting on my couch, cuddled up next to my kids watching Harry Potter. I mean, I'm doing anything but having a business meeting.
Sure.
And in this moment I thought, I am richer than this person. Like I am wealthier than this person because I have the balance better figured out. And people will push back on this idea. I mean, since I've come out with the book, people have pushed back on this idea and they go, "Well, hey, maybe he just loves his work more than you do. Maybe this is what brings him joy." The research actually shows that even among people who value their work, even among people who love their work, even among people who love money, time is still the best thing that you can buy.
Mhm.
And like I talked about in the book and you just read there, it's the only thing that ever truly appreciates and you can't get more of. And so you see this in the research. You see this in the research by Dunn and Norton and others who have shown that uh, buying our way out of work that we hate, mowing your lawn, doing your laundry, whatever, is
Mhm.
actually a really powerful, positive use of wealth.
Mhm.
Buying your freedom. There's one chapter called "You Don't Want to Be Rich, You Want to Be Free." And I think that one of the highest and best uses of wealth is to be able to do as little stuff that you don't want to do as possible and
Mhm.
spend your time thinking about the most important things, right? If I won the lottery tomorrow, I wouldn't spend one more minute, in some sort of corporate meeting. It would be all meaning and love and purpose all the time, right? And as we accrue wealth and as we get more financial flexibility, we're able to buy back our time and buy back our freedom. And I think there's scarcely a better thing you could do with your wealth.
Somebody reminded me that you can always borrow money and you can always make more money, but you can't do it with time. And all the things you mentioned, I think it's a personal choice. If somebody loves the work and it really fulfills them and they would rather be in the office on a Saturday night, that's a personal choice. But
Hmm.
I think just being aware that you are trading time for money and how do you want to do it and maybe tweak it so that it's really aligned with the way you want to live your life. I think it's very refreshing and eye-opening. I have a handful of more things I want to bring up. I do want to talk about the structure and the process. And you tell a beautiful story of Amundsen and his expedition to the South Pole. And it inspired me to read that book. There's a book that compares the two expeditions that's on my reading list. And after reading your book, I'm going to read that book. But you say having well-structured processes in place to minimize risks and adjust to the uncertainty was the real difference between the success and failure, life and death. And I feel like it applies in this case, but it applies in life and in investing as well. Having a plan. Even the two teams, the one that actually made it was the disadvantaged one, was smaller and so on, less funded. But the plan and the process and everything else was more important than the resources and the size of the team. And I think it applies in many other places. Can you talk about it?
Yeah, I can. I'm glad you like that. I love that story as well. It's about the Amundsen and Scott expeditions, and as you suggested, the party that was better resourced, had more notoriety, actually had the worse plan, and sort of
Mm-hmm.
got wrapped up in the grandeur rather
Mm-hmm.
than the practicality. And I think there's an analog for many investors. I think many investors want things that are esoteric or complicated or expensive that they can talk about, rare. And a lot of times the simpler plan is the better plan. My favorite part of that anecdote is where the losing party wanted to use horses because they looked majestic, and the winning party said, well, we're going to use sled dogs because they sat with the Inuit
Mm-hmm.
people. They met with the native people and said, hey, what sort of animals are fit for this terrain.
Uh-huh.
And it was a certain type of sled dog. Well,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, a pony, maybe a pony is more majestic than a
Mm-hmm.
husky,
Uh-huh.
but they're not equally suited for the terrain. So I think a lot of times people get too bought in to the sizzle or the flash
Mm-hmm.
of an investment, and don't always think about whether it's fit for purpose. The whole chapter is about willpower because both men wanted the same thing and wanted it. This isn't a
Mm-hmm.
diss, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
they both wanted it very fervently. They both worked very hard. They both were capable, but one had a better plan. I liken that to better habits, in
Mm-hmm.
the book. And, we also talk about in the book about willpower. A lot of what willpower looks like is just keeping yourself out of bad situations. That was sort of the two things.
Mm-hmm.
People who were shown to have higher levels of willpower really had better plans and did a better job of staying out of harm's way, right? If you're an alcoholic, you shouldn't hang out in bars.
Right.
If you're an investor who is prone to panicky, poor decisions, you probably shouldn't watch the cable financial news every day
Mm-hmm.
when you wake up. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's like what ideas, what people, what are you surrounding yourself with? And that even extends to our reading and our media consumption and things like that. So willpower is basically a plan and a process for staying out of harm's way.
We all have weaknesses, and it's not really, a revelation here, but the fact that once you find the weakness and you find a way to live with that weakness, that already gives you power. I think that's how you look at it, right? So when you
Yeah.
realize this is my weakness, maybe I shouldn't have the trading app on my phone to react to the news or the gossip or whatever my friend told me. You can actually work around it. And we all have our weaknesses. We're not perfect. I'm
Yeah,
not. And
yeah, it's exactly right. You know, I go back to the health journey that I've been on this year. My wife is a tall, statuesque Scandinavian woman who can eat absolutely whatever she wants and still be thin and beautiful. And I have had to talk with her and say, look, you cannot, I know you can eat this, but I
mm-hmm,
can't see this, you know,
mm-hmm.
because if this is in my house, it's going in my mouth. And then and then we're gonna have a problem. So it's like, look, what we lack in willpower, we can
Mm-hmm.
make up for in our planning. And I think that's a powerful life lesson across many contexts.
I love it. Real quick, I do want to ask you about freedom that you brought up and close out with freedom. But before that, I do want to bring out a quote that really resonated with me. It's from Helen Keller in your book. You say, no pessimist, she said, but you mentioned it, no pessimist ever discovered the secrets of the stars or sailed to an uncharted land or opened a new heaven to the human spirit. I want to bring it up because a big overarching idea, we invest because we believe that the future is better. You talk about the radical optimism in your book. Real quick, can you point us in the right direction on that front? Because we're so obsessed with what can go wrong. But at the end of the day, investing is about believing in a better future ahead of us, isn't it?
Yeah, I love that framing of investing, right? You know, when I think a lot of times we engage with our financial lives at the most micro and the most reductionistic level possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, we're very short term in our thinking, we're very utilitarian in our thinking, and I think that that can lead us astray. The meta idea of investing is that the arc of human progress is up and to the right. You know, the arc of human progress is up and to the right. And if we look back over many of the things that we've talked about just in this episode, that's the case, right? It's imperfect, it's meandering, it's not a perfectly straight line up and to the right. But in general, people become kinder, better, more productive, and the world is getting better. And we can get so mired in the moment to moment dust ups that we forget that fundamentally every 2 weeks when we put that money in our investment account, right, or whenever you do it, you are saying, this is my belief in a brighter tomorrow. And that is a bet that is paid off throughout human history, throughout wars and viruses and, catastrophes and natural disasters. The arc of human progress has been up and to the right. And I think that's such a powerful sort of meta conceit to think about when we think about investing.
To close out on a even higher note that really resonated with me and something you briefly brought up, you write, you don't really want to be rich, you want to be free. How do you think about it in a couple of sentences?
Yeah, you know, it's when you look at what money can buy, right? When you look at what money can buy, we talk about this in another part of the book, but once you've got the basics covered, the biggest thing you can do, and those are important, right? Like it's important to get the basics covered, the basics of sort of human comfort. Uh, but once that's covered, the biggest thing you can do with your money is to unshackle yourself from roles and responsibilities that don't serve you and that don't make your life joyful. Because life is very, very short. And that's a platitude, and everyone sort of knows it, but not many people internalize it until it's too late, like we talked about at the beginning. But some of the best money you'll ever spend is, buying your freedom and buying your time. So
I love it.
Couldn't do any better than that.
Freedom it is. Dan, thank you so much for today. This was incredible. I highly recommend the book, The Soul of Wealth, 50 Reflections on Money and Meaning. Wonderful read, and all stories are incredible. And we just scratched the surface today, but I think it gave the audience a flavor of what's in the book.
Well, thank you for helping me get the word out. You're a wonderful host.
My pleasure. Anytime. Thank you, Dan. You were listening to Talking Billions. We talk about big ideas, big inspirations, big topics. We take on the hardest subject of all, money. But our conversations lead us to an even bigger question: what it means to live a rich life beyond money. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment and follow, subscribe, rate, and share with friends and family. We rely on word of mouth to promote the show. One click for you means the world to us. Thank you. Until next time, your host, Bogumil Baranowski.